It happened to me years ago, when I was still young and stupid enough to believe that money could wash away guilt. Back then, I worked on a seal hunting vessel in the freezing waters of the Bering Sea. We were poor men chasing easy profit, sailing north each spring to the edge of the drifting ice where the seals gathered to give birth. That was where the real money was, the pups. I still remember the morning our ship ground against the ice. The hull groaned like an old animal as the captain pushed us closer to the frozen fields. When the engine finally died, we climbed down onto the ice with our hooks and clubs. The air was so cold it burned your lungs. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. The sky was pale and empty, and the sea was silent beneath the ice. And everywhere, there were seal pups, hundreds of them. Tiny white bodies scattered across the snow like dropped cotton. They lay there blinking slowly, lifting their heads to watch us approach. Their eyes were enormous, black, curious. They didn't run. They didn't understand what we were. A newborn seal pup can't swim yet. It waits on the ice for its mother to return from the sea. It trusts the ice. It trusts the world. It has no reason to expect death. Our boots crunched across the frozen surface as we spread out. Then the first man raised his hook. The metal spike came down hard. The sound it made, I will never forget. A dry crack, a tiny scream, and then bright red blood spread across the snow, steaming in the cold air. After that, everything happened very quickly. Men moved from one pup to another. Hooks rose and fell. Bones cracked. Soft bodies twitched once and then stopped moving. The snow turned red in patches, like spilled paint across a white canvas. We worked fast. That was the rule. If the body cooled too much, the fur lost value. So we struck, skinned, and dragged the hides toward the boats before the warmth left them. Within an hour, the shoreline looked nothing like it had before. What had been a quiet nursery became a slaughterhouse. The snow was covered with pink carcasses, tiny bodies without fur. Little flippers curled uselessly toward the sky. Nearby lay piles of soft white pelts, stacked like blankets, waiting to be shipped south and sold for coats. And all the while, the mothers were returning. From the dark water beyond the ice, the adult seals climbed back onto the floes. They searched for their pups. They sniffed the blood. They cried. I swear to God, those cries sounded like human voices. High, broken, confused. They pushed their noses against the red stains in the snow, unable to understand where their children had gone. I still see their eyes sometimes when I try to sleep. That day, I understood something terrible. We weren't hunters. Hunters kill to survive. We were butchers, executioners, trading life for money. My partner on that trip was a man named Frank Doyle. Frank had the face of someone who had spent too many years drinking cheap whiskey and bad ports. His beard was gray with frost, and his eyes were always half closed, as if the world bored him. He spat onto the ice and wiped his knife against his sleeve. "Why the hell are you standing there, kid?" he barked. His voice cut through the wind. I hadn't moved for several minutes. "Look over there," Frank said, pointing with his hook. "Two more by that ice ridge." I gripped the wooden handle of my gaff hook. My gloves were stiff with frozen blood. "Frank," I muttered quietly, "listen to them." The wind carried another long cry across the ice. "They sound like people." Frank snorted. "That ain't people crying. That's money ringing." He stepped toward another seal. "You want to eat when we get back to port?" he continued. "Then swing the hook. If not, you can jump in the water and freeze with your conscience." We reached the edge of the floe. A larger seal lay there, not a newborn pup, a juvenile. Gray spots covered its body as it tried to drag itself across the ice with clumsy flippers. Blood already streaked the snow behind it. It lifted its head. Its breath came out in white clouds. Frank nodded toward it. "That one's fat," he said. "Good fur." Then he stepped aside. "Go on, kid." "Your turn." I raised the hook. The sun reflected off the steel spike. The seal stopped moving. It turned its head slowly and looked straight at me. In its eye, I saw my own reflection. A dark figure standing against endless white snow. A man holding death above a helpless creature. "Well," Frank snapped, "clock's ticking." I brought the hook down. The sound echoed in the empty ice field. Something inside me cracked in that moment. I felt it break, and every strike after that only made the emptiness grow larger. The smell of blood, warm and sweet in the freezing air, followed me for the rest of my life. But the seals were only the beginning, because a week later, we killed something. A week after the seal hunt, the northern wind pushed deeper into the gray waters of the Bering Sea. By then, the ice fields had drifted farther apart, leaving long black corridors of open water between them. The ocean looked endless and empty, like a cold desert made of waves. But our captain wasn't interested in scenery. He wanted something bigger, something worth real money. That morning, the lookout shouted from the mast, "Blow off the port side!" Everyone rushed to the rail. I saw it then, a column of white mist rising from the water. Then the back of a whale broke the surface, dark, enormous, and silent as a moving island. "A humpback," the captain muttered, his voice suddenly alive with excitement. "Boys, that's our payday." The crew moved like wolves scenting blood. Harpoons were brought out. Lines were checked. Engines roared as the ship turned. I stayed near the railing, watching the water. Something about the whale's slow movements made my chest tighten. It surfaced again, this time closer. Its back rolled through the waves like a drifting mountain. Then it disappeared beneath the sea. "Ready!" the captain shouted. The harpoon gun fired with a thunderous crack. The iron spear flew across the water and struck deep into the whale's side. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ocean exploded. The whale erupted from the water in a storm of foam and fury. Its tail slammed the surface so hard the impact shook the ship. The line attached to the harpoon screamed as it uncoiled. The animal dove, dragging the vessel sideways. "Hold her steady!" someone yelled. The sea turned violent. Water surged over the deck. The whale surfaced again, closer now, twisting its massive body in agony. Its cry was low and deep, not loud, not dramatic, just heavy, like the sound of something ancient breaking. Another harpoon struck, then another. The water turned dark red around the creature. The whale thrashed until the ocean itself seemed to boil. Then, slowly, its movements weakened. The tail rose once more into the air, then it fell. The sea grew quiet again. The whale floated beside the ship like a fallen titan, dead. They tied the body to the side of the vessel. Up close, the whale was beyond comprehension. It was larger than the ship itself, a mountain of flesh and muscle, dark and glistening in the cold sea. Steam rose from its body like breath. Men climbed down ropes and stepped onto the floating carcass. Knives appeared, long blades fixed to wooden poles. "Let's open her up," Frank shouted from below. The work began immediately. They cut deep into the whale's skin. Thick black hide peeled back like the rind of a giant fruit. Underneath was the blubber, pink, shiny, heavy.
Hooks from the ship's crane sank into the flesh, and huge slabs of fat were torn free and lifted onto the deck. Each piece weighed hundreds of pounds.
The smell hit us all at once. Hot oil, salt, blood. It filled the air so thickly it was hard to breathe. Men laughed while they worked. They joked about how much money they'd make when the oil was sold. Someone even started singing. But I couldn't laugh. I stood by the railing again, watching. The whale's eye faced upward. It was enormous, almost the size of my head, and it was still open. Inside that dark eye, I saw the reflection of our ship, the tiny humans cutting the body apart, the cranes ripping flesh from bone. For them, it was just work. For me, it felt like we were tearing down something sacred. The ocean around us slowly darkened with blood. Seagulls circled above the ship, screaming wildly and diving for scraps. The cutting continued for hours. By evening, the whale no longer looked like a creature. It looked like raw material, a pile of meat, a thing stripped of its beauty. Frank climbed back onto the deck, covered in grease and blood. "Hey, preacher boy," he shouted. "Hand down a rope. We're drowning in meat down here." I didn't move. Frank stared at me. "You going soft again?" I kept looking at the whale's eye, at the silent reflection frozen inside it. And in that moment, I felt something cold growing inside my chest. Something that whispered one terrible thought. Maybe the ocean was watching us. And maybe it was waiting. By nightfall, the sky had changed. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon. The wind rose. The captain looked uneasy for the first time that day. "Storm's coming," he muttered. But by then it was too late. The sea had already decided to answer us. The storm arrived faster than anyone expected. One moment the sea was gray and restless. The next it turned into chaos. Wind howled across the water like a living thing. Snow and freezing spray filled the air, erasing the horizon completely. The world became a swirling white void where sky and ocean were the same. The northern wind groaned under the pressure of the waves. Then the engine coughed, once, twice, and died. A metallic scream echoed from deep inside the ship. From below deck, someone shouted, "The drive shaft's gone!" The vessel shuddered violently as another wave slammed against the hull. Without the engine, we were helpless, just a drifting piece of wood in the middle of an Arctic storm. "Rocks ahead!" the lookout screamed. But we couldn't see anything. The snow was too thick, the wind too strong. Then the impact came. A horrible, grinding sound tore through the ship as the hull scraped against stone. The entire vessel lurched sideways. Men were thrown across the deck like rag dolls. Another wave struck. The captain's voice roared through the chaos. "Abandon ship!" Panic exploded across the deck. Men grabbed whatever they could: ropes, food crates, signal flares. The sea was already pouring into the lower compartments. The northern wind was dying. I jumped over the railing into waist-deep freezing water. The cold stabbed through my clothes instantly, turning my muscles into stone. Ahead of me, jagged black rocks rose from the sea. A small island. Or maybe just a broken piece of coastline. Frank struggled beside me, dragging a sack of supplies. "Move, kid!" he shouted. "Unless you want to freeze with the ship!" The wind howled so loudly it felt like the sky itself was screaming. We climbed over slippery rocks, fingers numb and useless. Behind us, the ship tilted slowly. Then another wave crashed into it. The northern wind disappeared into the storm. Just like that. Our home, our prison, gone.
The storm pushed us inland across the frozen rock. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. 10 steps ahead was only white. Then Frank suddenly pointed. There! Through the blizzard, I saw a dark opening in the cliffs, a narrow crack in the stone, a cave. We stumbled toward it like dying animals.
Inside, the wind died instantly. The sudden silence was almost painful. We collapsed against the cold stone walls, gasping for breath. The cave smelled terrible. Rotting meat, wet fur, something old and sour. Frank lit a match. The tiny flame flickered weakly, revealing frost-covered walls and jagged stone formations hanging from the ceiling. Hell of a place, someone muttered behind me. The match burned out. Darkness swallowed us again. Then we heard it, a sound from deeper inside the cave, a low, wet rumble. Not wind, not water, something breathing. Another match flared to life. Then I grabbed one of the signal flares from my pack and struck it. The cave exploded with harsh red light, and that's when we saw it. At first, my mind refused to understand what I was looking at. The creature stepped slowly out of the darkness. It had once been a polar bear. You could still see it in the shape of the body, the massive shoulders, the thick legs, the size. But something had changed it, horribly. Its fur hung in dirty clumps, stained dark with dried blood. The face, God help me. The bear's jaw had been split open down the middle, not broken, opened, like something inside it had forced its way out. From that torn mouth emerged a mass of fleshy tentacles. They writhed slowly in the red flare light, covered in small, twitching suckers dripping with black slime. And the teeth. There were too many teeth. Rows of long, curved fangs pushed through the torn flesh of the skull like broken knives. The thing opened what remained of its mouth. A wet, clicking sound echoed through the cave. No one moved. No one breathed. Frank whispered behind me. Jesus Christ. The creature's eyes locked onto us. They weren't animal eyes anymore. They were something else. Something hungry. Something old. Then it moved. The monster crossed the cave faster than something that size should ever move. 1 second it was 20 feet away, the next it was among us. Tentacles shot forward. Frank screamed. One of the writhing limbs wrapped around his throat and lifted him off the ground like a rag doll. Bones cracked. The creature's jaws slammed shut around his shoulder. Blood sprayed across the cave walls. Panic exploded. Men ran in every direction, but the cave was too small. The monster was everywhere. Tentacles lashed through the air, grabbing, crushing, tearing. Screams echoed against the stone walls. The flare burned brighter, bathing everything in red light. The creature wasn't just killing. It was ripping us apart, like something was punishing us. For the seals, for the whale, for everything we had done. I scrambled backward and squeezed into a narrow crack between two boulders. My knife shook uselessly in my frozen hands. The flare sputtered behind me. One by one, the screams stopped. The cave fell silent. Only wet chewing sounds remained, and the crunch of breaking bones. Then the creature slowly turned its ruined head, its glowing eyes fixed directly on my hiding place. It knew I was there. The monster began moving toward me, and in that moment I understood something terrible. The ocean had sent its executioner, and it had come for all of us. I thought I was going to die in that cave. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide.
The crack between the rocks was barely wide enough for my body. My back pressed against the frozen stone while my boots slipped on the blood-soaked ground. The flare behind me flickered violently, throwing long shadows across the cave walls. The creature moved closer, slow, heavy. Every step made a wet sound as its claws sank into the mess of blood and flesh covering the floor. I could hear it breathing now, deep, rattling, like something dragging air through broken lungs. One of the tentacles slid across the stone beside my leg. Cold slime smeared against my boot. I stopped breathing. The thing leaned closer, its ruined head lowered toward the crack.
The smell that came from it was unbearable. Rotting meat, old blood, and something sour like dead fish left in the sun. Its eyes stared directly into the darkness where I hid. Red, glowing faintly in the dying flare light. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Predator and prey. Or so I thought. The tentacles twitched. They stretched toward me slowly, tasting the air. One of them brushed against my coat. My heart stopped. Then the creature froze. The tentacle slowly withdrew. The monster sniffed the air again. Its head tilted slightly, as if confused. Then something even stranger happened. It turned away, just like that. The creature moved back into the center of the cave, ignoring me completely. I didn't understand. It had found me. It could have killed me easily, but instead it left me there, trembling in the shadows. The flare finally died. Darkness swallowed the cave. I stayed where I was for hours, too terrified to move. The storm outside howled through the rocks like a pack of wolves. Snow blew into the cave entrance, slowly covering the bodies of my crew. But the creature didn't return. At some point, exhaustion dragged me into a shallow, broken sleep. When I woke up, the storm had passed. Cold, gray daylight filtered into the cave. For a long time, I didn't move. Then slowly, I crawled out of the crack. The cave looked like a slaughterhouse. Pieces of clothing, broken bones, dark frozen blood covering the stone. Frank's body lay near the entrance, or what was left of it. I forced myself not to look too closely. The creature was gone. Only huge claw marks remained on the stone floor, leading deeper into the cave system. I followed them halfway before stopping. The tunnel ahead disappeared into blackness. And from somewhere far below, I heard water. Deep ocean water moving through the rock. Whatever that thing was, it came from the sea. I turned around and left the cave. Outside, the island looked completely different in daylight. Jagged cliffs rose from the frozen shoreline. Pieces of our ship were scattered along the rocks below. The northern wind had broken apart during the night. But the main hull still remained, trapped between two ice ridges near the coast. That broken ship became my home, my prison, and the place where I would spend the next 3 years of my life. At first, I thought rescue would come quickly. Ships passed through these waters sometimes, but weeks turned into months. Then winter returned. The cold became something alive, something that crawled inside your bones. I survived by scavenging what remained of the ship. There was still dried food in the storage lockers, barrels of whale oil, tools, ropes, old blankets. The hardest part was the darkness. During winter, the sun barely rose above the horizon. Sometimes days passed without real light, only endless twilight. I burned pieces of broken deck wood to stay warm, and I listened. Because the creature never truly left. Sometimes I saw its shadow moving across the cliffs at night. Sometimes I heard heavy breathing outside the steel hull of the ship. Once I woke up to find massive claw marks scratched across the frozen deck. But it never attacked me, not once.
Over time, the fear slowly changed into something else: understanding. We were both survivors, both stranded in that frozen wasteland, both broken. The cold slowly destroyed my body. Frostbite took the toes first, then 2 fingers, then another. I cut the dead flesh away myself, using a rusted knife and a bottle of cheap alcohol I found in the captain's cabin. Every cut felt like fire, but it kept the infection from spreading. Years passed. My beard grew long. My skin turned gray from the cold. I stopped counting the days. Until one morning, the creature disappeared. Completely. For the first time in years, the island felt empty. And a month later, rescue finally arrived. The rescue ship was called the Arctic Star.
I remember the moment I saw it like it happened yesterday. I had climbed the cliffs that morning to check the horizon, something I had done almost every day for 3 years. Most days there was nothing to see except endless gray water and drifting ice. But that morning, there was smoke, a thin black line rising against the sky. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Then I saw the shape. A ship, moving slowly through the ice. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My legs nearly gave out beneath me. I scrambled down the rocks toward the wreck of the Northern Wind, grabbing the signal flares I had saved all those years. My hands barely worked anymore. Only a few fingers remained on each one, twisted and stiff from frostbite. Still, I managed to strike the flare. The red fire exploded into life. I waved it wildly in the air. "Hey!" My voice cracked from years of silence. "Hey!" The flare hissed and burned. For a long moment, the ship kept moving. Then it slowed. The vessel turned and began heading toward the island. I collapsed to my knees in the snow. They had seen me. The crew of the Arctic Star found me, sitting beside the broken hull of my old ship. Later, they told me I didn't look human anymore. My beard reached my chest. My clothes were little more than rags tied together with rope. My skin was pale and cracked like old leather. And my hands. They wrapped them immediately in blankets so I wouldn't see the horror of what remained. When the sailors climbed down onto the rocks, they approached carefully. One of them called out, "Hey there! You alive?" I nodded slowly. It was the first time I had heard another human voice in years. They helped me onto their boat and lifted me aboard the ship. Warm air, real food, human faces. It all felt unreal. Someone handed me a bowl of broth. My hands shook so badly that the sailor had to hold the cup for me while I drank. "Easy," he said quietly. "You're safe now." Safe. I almost laughed. If only he knew. The captain asked me what had happened. He assumed our ship had been destroyed in the storm and the crew lost to the sea. That was the story everyone expected, and that was the story I told. I spoke slowly, carefully, leaving certain things out. I told them about the storm, about the crash, about surviving on the wreck, but I never mentioned the cave. I never spoke about the thing inside it. Some truths are too dangerous to share. They took me south, back to civilization, back to warm cities and crowded ports. Doctors treated my frostbite. They amputated what remained of the ruined fingers. By the time I recovered, I barely recognized my own hands. But I was alive. That was more than the rest of my crew could say. The world moved on. People forgot about the lost hunting vessel, forgot about the men who died in the ice. But I never forgot, because sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. That breathing, deep, wet, patient. And sometimes I wonder something that still keeps me awake. Why did the creature spare me? Why was I the only one allowed to live? I didn't understand the answer until years later, the day I returned to the sea and saw something rising from the water. For years after the rescue, I tried to live like a normal man. I worked at the docks in Seattle, unloading cargo ships and fishing boats. It was simple work, the kind that kept your hands busy and your mind quiet. But the sea never truly lets you go, even when you leave it behind. Sometimes, late at night, when the harbor was calm and the fog rolled over the water, I would hear something beneath the docks. Not waves, not boats. Something breathing. Deep. Slow. Like the ocean itself was alive. Whenever that happened, I would leave immediately, because I knew what that sound meant. Or, at least, I feared I did. Years passed. The world changed. But the memories never faded. The seals, the whale, the cave, and that creature. Sometimes I wondered if the cold and isolation had broken my mind. Maybe the monster had been nothing more than a hallucination born from guilt and starvation. But then something happened that proved I had not imagined it. It was a foggy morning in early autumn. The harbor was quiet, wrapped in thick gray mist that swallowed the horizon. Only the dull clang of metal and the creaking of ropes broke the silence. I was unloading crates from a small fishing trawler when one of the younger sailors shouted, "Hey! Something's out there!" Everyone on the dock turned. At first, we saw nothing. Then the water began to move. Slow ripples spread across the surface of the harbor. Something massive was rising from the depths. The fog parted slightly, and for a moment, I saw it. A dark shape just beneath the surface, too large to be a whale, too wrong to be anything natural. The water bulged upward. Then a long, pale tentacle broke through the surface before slipping back beneath the waves. The fishermen around me laughed nervously. "Probably a giant squid," one of them joked. "Or maybe a submarine." But I knew better, because I had seen those tentacles before. I had seen the teeth, the ruined bear skull, the red glowing eyes. The sea hadn't forgotten, and neither had the thing living inside it. That night I couldn't sleep. The foghorns echoed through the harbor while the tide crept slowly against the docks. Around midnight, I heard it again. That same breathing, deep, wet, coming from beneath the wooden planks. I stepped outside my small dockside apartment and walked toward the pier. The harbor lights barely cut through the fog. Everything looked like shadows. The water below the dock was completely black, still, silent. Then something brushed the wooden pillars beneath my feet. A slow scraping sound traveled through the boards. My heart started pounding. I leaned over the edge and looked down into the water. At first, there was nothing. Then two faint red lights appeared beneath the surface. Eyes, watching me. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then the lights blinked once, slowly, and vanished into the darkness below. I stepped back from the dock, my hands shaking, because in that moment, I finally understood something terrifying. The creature had never attacked me. Not because I was lucky, not because I had hidden well enough, but because it had recognized me, recognized what I had become. A witness, a reminder, a living scar of what humans had done to the ocean, and perhaps something even worse. Maybe the creature hadn't spared me out of mercy. Maybe it had spared me because it knew, one day, I would tell the story. A warning for anyone who still believes the sea belongs to us. Because out there, in the deep, dark water, something is still waiting. After that night at the harbor, I knew one thing for certain. The creature from the ice had followed me. Not across the ocean in the way ships travel, but through something deeper, something older than maps or coastlines. For weeks, I avoided the docks whenever I could. I took work inland, unloading trucks and crates far from the water. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same image. Those two red lights staring up from the black water. Watching. Waiting. Eventually, I realized something terrifying. Running from the sea was impossible. The ocean is everywhere. Every river leads back to it. Every storm is born from it. And whatever lived in that frozen cave belonged to the ocean itself. The second encounter happened 3 months later. A fishing trawler came into harbor badly damaged. The hull looked like it had been clawed apart, not broken by rocks, not ripped by another ship. Clawed. Deep gouges ran across the steel plates like something enormous had tried to tear the boat open. The fishermen who survived refused to talk about what happened. They were pale, shaking. One of them kept repeating the same sentence over and over. There was something under the water, something big. The captain eventually told the authorities it must have been a collision with floating ice, but I saw the marks. I knew better. Claws. Massive ones, just like the scratches I'd seen on the wreck of the Northern Wind. Not long after that, strange stories started spreading along the coast. Fishing nets pulled up shredded, as if bitten in half. Boats disappearing in calm water. Sailors claiming they saw pale shapes moving beneath the waves at night. Most people laughed it off. Sea monsters have always been good for tavern stories. But the fishermen, they stopped going out as far. Some of the older captains began whispering something I hadn't heard in years. The sea is angry. When I heard those words, a chill ran through me. Because that was exactly what I had felt in that cave. Not hunger, not instinct. Anger. One night, unable to sleep again, I returned to the harbor. The fog was thick, the water black and silent. I stood at the edge of the dock and stared into the darkness. "I know you're there," I whispered. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the water moved. Slow circles spread across the surface, and something massive rose just beneath the waterline. 2 red lights appeared again. Eyes, watching me from the deep. This time I didn't step back. I didn't run. Instead, I spoke. "We deserved it," I said quietly. The fog swallowed my voice, but somehow I knew the creature heard me. "We killed everything we touched. The seals, the whale, the ocean." For a moment, the water remained still. Then the surface shifted. A shape rose just high enough for me to see it clearly. Not the bear I remembered. Something far worse. The creature had changed. Its body was larger now. The torn skull had split even wider, revealing rows of teeth inside layers of flesh. The tentacles were longer, stronger. They slid through the water like living ropes. But the eyes were the same. Burning red in the darkness. We stared at each other for several seconds. Then, slowly, the creature sank back into the depths. The water closed above it, and the harbor became quiet again. I never saw it again after that night, but sometimes fishermen still report strange things far out at sea, Lights beneath the waves, massive shadows moving below their boats, and every once in a while, something far stranger. Dead seals washing ashore, not eaten, not torn apart, just lying there on the sand, as if something had killed them and left them behind. A warning, a reminder of what we did, and of what waits beneath the ocean when nature finally decides it has had enough. So if you ever sail far into the cold northern waters, if the sea suddenly grows quiet and the fog rolls in thicker than it should, listen carefully, because sometimes, in the silence between the waves, you can still hear it breathing. And if you do, pray that it decides you are not worth remembering.